Welcome, welcome, welcome. Welcome to the Movement Cafe. We are in the midst of our July Movement Cafe getting started, and we're going to be talking about disaster response and just resilience. And we have some wonderful folks here to share today. And as people roll in, I just want to offer a welcome. We are so this is part of the United Methodist Creation Justice Movement. The Movement Cafe is once a month. And next month, we'll be talking about worship resources. And last month, we got to talk about net zero efforts. So we get to reach into local churches and conferences across the denomination and bring those together into the cafe to share and learn together, because we're all learning. This is just a huge learning curve for everybody. And so if you're coming here as an expert with all sorts of information and knowledge, or you're coming here going, what is going on? You are in the right place. This is the right place. That's how we all kind of work it out and figure it out together. So I'm glad you're all here. So I also want to introduce myself a little bit. My name is Rashenda. And I am here with the Circle Faith Future, which is an organization that a colleague and I incorporated in Oregon and Washington, where we try to do good in the world, right? Like all of us. I would encourage you to introduce yourself in the chat. Let us know where you are. Let other folks know what you're working on, because chances are there's somebody here working on that and would love to connect with you and learn more about what you're doing as well. So now, as I said before, this is part of the United Methodist Creation Justice Movement, which I was super excited to find and discover myself. And I want to turn this over for a few minutes to Kathy Velasquez Eberhardt. She is absolutely key at the center of that movement, and she's going to tell you more about it.
Hi, folks. Greetings from Minnesota, where I am an earth keeper in the United Methodist Church here in Minnesota. I'm excited to, every time we have these cafes, to really embody what this movement has become, which is a network of folks building relationships across the structures and relationships and networks that are the United Methodist Church. Really, the disasters that we're talking about today are in some ways, as we woke up, as folks were waking up to the urgency of climate change, of the increasing numbers of disasters around the planet, we knew that we needed to do more, and we knew that our church could do more. And so while we know there have been beautiful words on the books for many years, and there are people who've been doing this work around creation justice in the church for many years, we knew we could do more. And so we started gathering at conferences and at summits. We built relationships through Earth Keepers, and we kept asking the question, what more can we do together? And out of that, we've developed a number of work teams. There's teams that are working on policy advocacy, some that are working on worship. There's a communications team, which is the birthplace of these Movement Cafe conversations and our newsletter. There on our website, there's some conversations in the fledgling conversations in the works around solar and net zero and on what we might do together at General Conference. And there's a very active annual conference organizing team. There's just a lot. And if there's a conversation you would like to have, please let us know. We can help facilitate those actions so that we can find each other and imagine more work together. Today, as I said, as Rashenda referred to, we will be focusing on really the disaster response part of our church that has for many, many years been a strong presence of showing up in the midst of disaster to be love to each other. And so we will be hearing from representatives around the church who are doing that work, but who are also rethinking what does it look like now? What more could we do that to provide sanctuary, to provide just and cover just resiliency? How can we be prepared and also respond? And so I'm really looking forward to this conversation, and I think I'll just turn it back to Rashenda to that's kind of my nutshell, and to kind of facilitate us through. Welcome, everybody. So glad to have you here.
Awesome, Kathy. Yes, I was just about to give you a little chat about the nutshell, so that's perfect. So what I'd like to do is we're gonna very soon listen and hear from our folks who are here from, I'll tell you, all the way from Alaska to Florida to New Jersey, South Carolina. With just I am in awe and grateful for those who are joining us to share about what their work is. And I'm going to start with just introductions, a short introduction of each of them. And then we will get started, because I really want you to know who we've got here, who we really, really just grateful to have. So Reverend Jonathan Brake is here, and he is United Methodist elder in Western North Carolina. He began the Creation Care Ministry of the Western North Carolina Conference and is a founding member of the United Methodist Creation Justice Movement. He is commissioned as a UM Earthkeeper in 2016, and he joined the Environmental Sustainability Team at Global Ministries in 2022 and is now overseeing the Global Ministries Earthkeeper program. So we will hear more about that as we go. Brian Mateer is the Director of Missional Engagement for the Western North Carolina Conference of the United Methodist Church, and his role there includes conference disaster response. He's the coordinator and a staff liaison to the Creation Care team for that conference. He was commissioned as a Earthkeeper in 2021. His Earthkeeper project was the development of the eco-focused mission journey trips to disaster impacts. And he will talk some about solar trailers, and I know there's a lot of interest in that, so we will get to hear from him. Cricket Denton is an ordained deacon in the United Methodist Church and is the newly appointed director of student and mission ministries at Haddon UMC in Greater New Jersey, and is also serving as the conference disaster response coordinator and chair of the Order of Deacons. So she has degrees in communications and counseling, and also she is a musician who's performed at Lincoln Center and Carnegie Hall. So that's pretty awesome. Reverend Dan Wilcox is United Methodist pastor in Anchorage, Alaska, and also serves as the conference disaster response coordinator for the Alaska Conference. He has served in this capacity for 8 years, during which he has helped in response to wildfires, flooding, landslides, earthquakes, and typhoons. He is a member of the Alaska Volunteer Organizations active in disasters, and he helps to coordinate the efforts of various nonprofits, state, and federal partners in disaster response. We all know how collaborative this work has become. And Trish Warren is the conference disaster response coordinator for the Florida Conference of the United Methodist Church. And Trish works to ensure her conference and local churches are prepared for the next disaster with a plan. Trish is a regional team leader during Hurricane Irma, as well as the response to both Hurricanes Ian and Nicole. And Trish works with local churches to support also refugee resettlement. And we know all these pieces of resilience and disaster response, they work together, they ping together, we're learning together. And really, really grateful to have all of our presenters here today. They're also going to be hosting breakout rooms later, so you'll have a chance to chat with them one-on-one. So turn it over at this point to Trish, who's going to start us off. And Trish, I'm going to turn it over to you, and I'm just really so glad you're here.
Hey, thank you, Rashenda. Let me get my screen up here. And thank you all for being with us today. I'm really excited about this opportunity to share with you all a little bit about what Florida has been doing in their response, and hopefully we can share about a little about our solar trailers as well. So as Rashenda said, I am Trish Warren. I'm the Conference Disaster Response Coordinator for the Florida Annual Conference. Been on staff since Hurricane Irma made landfall in late 2017, and during my time with the conference, I have worked to ensure that we are better prepared and more resilient in order to respond faster to disasters and more compassionately to disasters throughout our conference, especially as we are seeing that increase in frequency and intensity. So in January of 2022, we began a response to the 2022 tornadoes in Southwest Florida that hit the Fort Myers area and the Charlotte County area down in Southwest Florida. And as we were going through this recovery, Hurricane Ian made landfall, and Hurricane Nicole also made landfall. The 2022 hurricane season started off a little slow, but it became one of the deadliest and most damaging hurricane seasons in modern history, with over 150 people killed and more than $110 billion in damage. And although the season had like an average to below average number of storms, researchers have determined that climate change is resulting in larger and more powerful storms. And for those of us in inland Florida, we also witnessed extreme flooding that took place during Hurricanes Ian and Nicole. And that flooding is likely due to the warming climate holding more moisture, which then produces more rain. I'm so grateful for Global Ministries. On February 1st of 2022, along with the North Carolina Annual Conference, we were awarded a grant to partnership with the Footprint Project to build a mobile solar trailer. The plan was to build the generator in September at our conference office, and the North Carolina Annual Conference planned to come down and join us for this build so they could build theirs. Unfortunately, this solar generator was scheduled to take place the weekend after Hurricane Ian made landfall. And we had numerous conversations with Global Ministries and my friend Al Miller with the North Carolina Annual Conference, who is also in this Zoom call today, and with the Footprint Project. And we made the decision to move forward with this plan to build the solar generators. Not only did both conferences build their generators as scheduled, we were also able to deploy microgrids that had been donated that had been loaned to us from Tesla. And Al was instrumental in helping deploy those microgrids and set them up. And they were used to set up triage spaces for rescue operations in some of the hardest hit areas. They also provided power to a church to support their feeding ministry. In some of our areas, currently there is still power that has not been restored. And we are almost a year out from Hurricane Ian making landfall. And that is because houses just don't have that connectivity from the street to the home. So these mobile generators are going to be instrumental not only in the recovery that we're currently going through, but also in future disasters. For our friends along the coast of Florida, Hurricane Ian caused record-breaking storm surge. We are experiencing a rising sea level, which is causing the storm surge to worsen. And then with the intensity of the storms, that has also caused the storm surge to become more intense. In the area where Hurricane Ian made landfall down in Southwest Florida, sea levels have already increased by 1 foot. And as sea levels rise, we are seeing an increase in climate gentrification for many of our coastal communities. For example, in Miami, our historically Black communities are on higher ground. And as upper to middle class people are moving into those communities on higher ground, these affordable housing options are decreasing for our lower income communities. So as we work for long-term recovery for Hurricane Ian, we've once again partnered with UMCOR with a grant that includes training from South Face on weatherization for response for disasters. And in August of this year, we will bring our construction coordinators into the conference. South Face will be here, UMCOR will be here, and Jenny Phillips will also be here with Global Ministries. And we're the first conference that I'm aware of who will be offering this weatherization training and having weatherization in our plans for long-term recovery. And then I'm excited to share that on July 1st, the Disaster Recovery Ministry in Florida has transitioned from missional engagement to the Episcopal office. In addition to that, our bishop has recognized that supporting this ministry and the needs of this ministry in the immediate aftermath of a disaster is instrumental. And so he has communicated to building staff that in the weeks after the immediate aftermath of a disaster, They are going to be assisting us in our response. These changes will allow the conference to understand the importance of how we respond to disasters and show the love of God to our neighbors who are facing some of the most difficult moments in their lives. And Rashenda, that is all that I have.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah, I want to encourage you, if you have questions, you can put them in the chat, and folks here can help work to answer them as we go. As well as we're going to have some time when the presentations are finished to do some questions and answers. So if you have something that you really want to ask, be ready. We're going to be doing that as well. Then the next presenter, I want to kind of I've already done introductions, but we're turning it now over to Brian, and go right ahead.
So I appreciate being invited to be a part of this, and I recognize a lot of friends and colleagues on this call, and I wanted to specifically point out Jared Davis on this call. It might be interested to the folks that have joined us that he is a newly appointed position for the Western North Carolina Conference and the North Carolina Conference as the Creation Ministries Coordinator. So it's a unique and new shared position, and we're hoping that this can be a model for other conferences that may need to share this kind of role. So and I pointed him out because we had a Creation Care team meeting today, and something that he said made me change the title to this to my presentation, and he mentioned climate change is disaster, and that's very much the case. And although I've been introduced to you through my bio, I think it might be helpful for me to give a little bit of background information as to how I got to where I am today. So my dad's a United Methodist pastor, retired from the Virginia Conference, and I ran from the church like many PKs do for some time. But ultimately, I'm celebrating my 21st year in vocational ministry as a layperson in the United Methodist Church. I started working at the Western North Carolina Conference in December of 2019 as the Associate Director of Missional Engagement. And then in August of 2021, we had a climate-related event in Haywood County, North Carolina, that was a result of flooding from Tropical Storm Fred. And it wasn't a major storm, but it came up from the Gulf of Mexico and into the mountains of Western North Carolina. And 12 inches of rain fell in 14 hours, 8 of which fell in a 2-hour span. And it wasn't the flooding from the rivers being filled, it was a geological event from the mountains of Western North Carolina that caused a landslide across the Pigeon River, causing it to dam up, pool the water, and then it eventually broke. The impact of that damaged or destroyed over 500 homes, and unfortunately 6 people were killed due to that event. It's a 100-year storm that happened twice since 2004. So me, new to the job, I had a background, my major is in environmental science, and my scientific mind started to ask the questions as to why this is happening. So this kind of this integration of mission response, disaster response, and missional and creation care all came together as I started to ask questions and learned of the Earth Keepers program. And as a result of the storm, I began to learn kind of some of the social justice issues that were related to climate-related events and disasters. And so who's impacted from climate change? Well, everyone, but disproportionately underserved communities are impacted most. So renters, folks that have no other option but to live in floodplains, folks that have, maybe generational poverty. It also disproportionately affects Black and Brown communities. We learned of environmental racism, of how the impacts of pollution dumping in communities in Haywood County impacted folks. It also impacts the elderly population. Oftentimes after disasters and events, storm chasers go from community to disaster and take advantage of elderly population that are looking to quickly put their homes back together. In the Crusoe Valley, where the Pigeon River lies, it also impacted migrant workers. There's large tomato farms in the Crusoe Valley, so their employment was lost, their livelihood was lost. So again, I'm pointing out the most vulnerable. And finally, our non-human neighbors. There's a large trout stream in the Pigeon River. There's a fishery there where hundreds of thousands of trout were lost. Cars were washed into the river, and seepage from all sorts and debris from all sorts of construction and home sites were impacting the rivers. So as we know, really, I started my work in disaster response as a youth leader responding to Hurricane Katrina, and we saw the impacts of that on underserved communities. We saw it in Tropical Storm Fred. It's happened before Katrina. It will continue to happen. All the isms that we can think of from a social justice perspective are heightened. And particularly, I know Trish mentioned this about affordable housing. In the mountains of Western North Carolina, where a lot of climate migration, folks from Florida and other places are moving to, folks that have second homes and have Airbnb rentals, the housing market has exploded. So folks that are in these underserved communities, they don't have very many options. They cannot afford housing in different places that might be safer. So it's all interconnected: creation care, disaster response, and social justice of vulnerable populations. So all these areas that I've been working in and through for years kind of culminated together. So here's a few things that we think about as disaster responders and my role as conference disaster response coordinator. These are some of the phases, and the ones that are starred there are areas that our team has been looking at as to how creation care can enter into. So readiness, rescue, relief, recovery, and review. So we started to talk about ways we can do things differently. As my Earthkeeper project, Jonathan mentioned, Rashinda mentioned, we developed the Eco Mission Journey, which is basically a mission trip that we would think of, but the focus, the education component, and the work was all around eco-justice related issues. Mitigation, so we talk about mitigation, how we can do things to mitigate disasters in the future or mitigate the impact of disasters. So some of the things that we've worked with were stream bank stabilization, planting of native species, and Trish mentioned some of the things that she's doing in disaster response in Florida. We found that partnering is a great way to go about this. There's already people in many communities across in the communities that you live that are already doing this work. Oftentimes they have the funding. What they need is the volunteers, and I think that's the way that the church can be involved. Building community resilience. One thing is just have a plan. We have a program called the Green Church Initiative, which helps green our buildings and helps us think through how we're utilizing our spaces and places. And also with the current conditions of being the hottest couple of weeks recorded in history, what about the church being areas of heating and cooling, or cooling centers to help people out of underserved or vulnerable people out of the heat. Trish mentioned the solar trailers and generators and microgrids. We also offer some tips to how to green your trip. So how can disaster response teams or other mission teams, how can they be more eco-friendly before, during, and after? And what can they do from the things that they learn? And then obviously we can advocate in our churches and our communities and with our elected officials. So in a nutshell, we're connected together through creation. The impacts of climate change are directly as a result and factor into our disaster response. And as we get more frequent and more intense disasters, we're going to have to find a new way and a better way of moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Absolutely. And when we kind of worked on planning this cafe, that came up a lot, this idea that, things have changed and we're really all in the midst of kind of trying to figure out what are these new ways of response? What are some of the new requirements of resilience? And really, really grateful for all the people having that really important conversation. I want to invite Dan to share with us. Dan is joining us from Alaska, and you're not on my visible screen, Dan. So hopefully, there you are. So hopefully you have everything working. I'm gonna turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, and it's good to be with you all. I think it's earlier for me. I was thinking it was earlier for me than anyone else, and then realized we have folks from around the world, so I guess that may not be true. But Dan Wilcox. I actually am full-time as a pastor, but also work as the Conference Disaster Response Coordinator, and have been doing that role for 8 years now. And just wanted to share with you some of the impacts of climate change, especially in Alaska. And I've been interested to be listening to some of the other presentations because some of what I have heard is echoed here in Alaska as well. So once I figure out how to make my screen go forward, there we go. I like to start with reminding people how big Alaska is. This is actually an image of the area of Alaska. The Aleutian Islands, which are the islands here off to the left of your screen. When I first moved to Alaska, it was to Unalaska, which was right here. And you all can see my mouse circling when I do. Okay, I wanted to make certain when I do that, I'm not just showing myself that. When I first moved to Alaska, that's where we lived. There's a United Methodist church there. And when I awoke one morning and somebody asked if I was okay after that earthquake, and I didn't know what they were talking about. It turned out there was an earthquake out here at the tip of the Aleutian archipelago, and we were 800 miles away, so we were totally unaffected, but they saw it was in the Aleutians and wanted to check. So to give you an idea of perspective, when I moved to Alaska from Pennsylvania, I had somebody, that couldn't quite get how far it was. If here was Unalaska, right up here is Anchorage, which is where I live now, and that was the closest hospital. And for those in South Central Pennsylvania, when we were moving away, I tried to give them some perspective to say that if I had to go on a medical emergency, it would be like the closest hospital was in St. Louis. So the size of our state is a challenge, but also we are only the second smallest state by population. So I think Wyoming is the only state that beats us out at this point as far as the number of people. But as many of the disasters that we have been dealing with lately have been affecting more strongly the Alaskan Native population. And so I wanted to speak a moment about that. The term Alaskan Native represents 11 distinct cultures and languages and 22 different language dialects. If you look at the map here, we have responded to fires in the interior, earthquakes that affected the South Central area, landslides that have been over here in the Southeast. And most recently, I've been working on, well, actually not most recently, but we've been working on the typhoon that affected the entire Western seaboard. And then most recently, we actually have been dealing with floods that have affected here in the interior. So in each of these cases, we've worked with Native communities, Native tribes, corporations to responds both in the response phase, as we've been getting people electricity, water, that sort of thing, but also in the recovery phase as we work towards rebuilding. Coastal flooding and erosion in Alaska. Some of this material, I will tell you, I got directly from the Division of Geological and Geophysical Surveys within the state of Alaska. Some of the information I'm going to share is actually dated, and that's intentional, because it predicted exactly what happened a year ago. And that was from 13 years ago. But 87% of the Alaska Native communities experience flooding and or erosion. If you notice these little dots, every one of them represents some community that has had effect of flooding, erosion, and other things. Those are two of our major concerns with climate change. Erosion and flooding, if you look in the upper left-hand corner, permafrost thaw because of warming temperatures. Coastal storms are occurring because of the ice has protected the coast when storms have hit, but when the ice is not there, storms hit even harder. And also we have the experience of sea level rise, which others have also mentioned. And changing to ocean conditions also is just the increase of waves and other concerns. So starting as much as 15 years ago, they have started working on forecasting long-term predictions of erosion for coastlines. Some communities have already moved. This is the community of, wait, I wanted to start back here. Gullivan is the village up here in the corner. That's a prediction model, which really can't be seen. This village is Napakiak. And you'll see erosion lines based on the year, but then also the estimate. And as you can see, by 25 years from now, the majority of the village in the lower village here will be gone. And so the interesting thing to me is most of these prediction models are showing two of the villages that got hit in the storm, Typhoon Mirbach last September. And so the forecasts are working, I mean, as far as predicting, and it's affecting the villages. Just to give you an idea of predicted climate changes, temperatures will increase with winter temperatures increasing at a higher rate than summer temperatures. Length of growing season and frost-free days will increase. Those of us who garden aren't going to complain about that, though we do recognize there is a challenge to that. Temperatures in seasonal transition months in many locations will shift below freezing to above freezing. Precipitation will increase, but the precipitation will fall as rain rather than snow. And storms intensity will increase, which directly affects the storms. Again, that is from a report that was in 2010, and that's exactly what we have been seeing for the past 14 years. It has been an ongoing challenge, and the storms have continued. Just wanted to share a couple. This is from the Sockeye fire. I was serving in the church that is right in Willow, which is where this fire hit. I was evacuated along with most of the town, and it took me about 5 days to know whether or not my house was still there. And so this is the McKinley fire. It happened about 15 miles further north than the Sockeye fire. Both of these happened because of abnormally dry conditions and the effects. The storms, we had I don't recall the word that they used, but we had some severe storms in the village of Haines. This is in the southeast, causing major mudslides that actually closed off. When you are in a coastal community that does not have a second road to get to your home, and the mudslide takes out the house or takes out the road, you lose the ability to get to your home. Western Alaska, this is Typhoon Mirbach. This is again last September. This was the prediction. Again, there's Gullivan, which I had mentioned before, and Napakiak, which I mentioned also, is down here in the white area. It's not identified on here. but the storm affected 22 villages across an area of 1,200 miles. And all of these villages can only be reached by air or by boat. Some of the villages, like the village of Stebbins here, there's another small village named St. Michael's, which is right next to it. There's a 10-mile road between them. But for the most part, the villages do not have roads connecting them. And we have, so logistical issues include how to get all of our building materials and everything in by plane. Volunteers, we have a couple of VOED partners who are actually, their whole thing is that they will fly our people into getting to places. Just a couple of images from Typhoon Merbok. You can see the swing set, and the swings are underwater there. Some of the after effects, you can see some of the effects of the erosion on the front row of the houses. But also, this is a National Guard individual who was out. We did have Alaska National Guard immediately on scene to help with the cleanup. And that's what I have, but thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Oh my goodness. Okay, so full disclosure, I'm in Oregon, Pacific Northwest area, and so Alaska is often on my heart and mind in recognizing when we talk about, first and worst, they're like that canary in the coal mine, that early warning. As we see the lines on Dan's presentation showing the erosion moving back past the villages, those are things we're going to be seeing along every coastline. Trish is already dealing with this in Florida. We're seeing this in lots of places. And the saturation of the land, which is now receiving so much more moisture because we have a warmer atmosphere and a warmer ocean, means that when things like earthquakes hit, the damage is worse. You hope it doesn't hit during a heat wave, but that saturation is going to likely potentially cause more damage than would have otherwise if everything was still frozen and icy, right? If we have a soft, sagging earth. Yeah, the roads washed out. I mean, I feel that in Oregon, anywhere where you have a more rural area of your state where there's one road really that goes in and out to those back areas. So as we look at Alaska and the predictions that are coming true, and that's actually just lining up with climate change, it gives us the good news of that, right? The good news is it gives us this early warning system. These are the things that we can expect. And these are the ways we can learn together to address them. So absolutely. Okay, so I want to, at this point, turn it over to Reverend Jonathan Brake. Jonathan, awesome. Thank you.
It's good to be with you. I come to you from Global Ministry of the Earth Keepers program, and I see a number of our Earth Keepers on this webinar together. So I'm so glad that you are here. Several months ago, it came to our attention from some Earth Keepers who work in disaster response that some of the training that we do in the Earth Keepers program itself is very applicable to the work that is needed in missions. And so as a result of that, we began learning how to apply some of those things, like Brian was mentioning in his presentation about the local social justice issues that come up that are tied into climate and to creation justice, and those things that are very helpful. Earth Keepers is designed to be a training for grassroots actions in local church and communities by laity and clergy. And so the training that we offer can also be used in times of mission and disaster response. In fact, I will be next week at the Youth 2024 event and helping with a workshop alongside the Global Mission Fellows called Mission Mistakes. And we're going to look at what are some of the things we do in mission trips that really aren't that helpful to the environment, to the greater picture, to the emissions that we emit that make things worse over the long term. And so we're tying it in those ways, as well as back in February, I had the opportunity to go and offer a workshop via the internet to the South Central Jurisdiction Mission Advocacy meetings. And I'll be doing the same next month with the North Central jurisdiction, where we looked at things like preparing for going into a site after a disaster and understanding some of what we teach in Earthkeepers that responders might need to be aware of to make sense of what they're doing. So often, we think of mission response and we think of, let's go in with a trailer full of saws and hammers and paintbrushes and things like that, and let's put things back together the way they were on a physical structural level. But what about the emotional, spiritual, cultural, communal level that is a part of that too? And so often when we have a disaster, the inequities become very real. Those who have the financial means to escape, to evacuate, to get out of the way are often just kind of move out of the way. And those left behind are those who are already the most struggling members of the community. And often that's tied into histories of racial and justice issues that have been there for generations, for disadvantages through things like redlining, through the fact that the GI Bill after World War II greatly disproportionately affected Black and brown soldiers and sailors who didn't get the same benefits as many others did. And so their social communities really struggled through that. Other forms of disadvantage have been lying under the surface or very obvious in a community. And you see that when you show up to do mission work. And so our training in Earthkeepers actually is useful in the ecological justice aspects of it, and seeing where a community is already hurting, because it's usually the most hurting people that we end up having to help in our mission trips. And so what I'm doing is teaching folks who are doing mission recovery work is going in beforehand and doing a little bit of research to find out who you're going to. And so there's easy ways to do that. You can do an internet search. You can pull up a town or city, get demographic information about that from their website. You can look at a zip code and get some government statistics and things about that, demographics. But then look for the recent news reports over the last several months to kind of see what was already going on in that community before this disaster or natural event, or as we might say, unnatural climate-induced event has taken place and made a difference in that area. And so if you're interested in preparing not just your own community for things like water concerns or food insecurity, or putting together solar programs for community solar or for your church, if you're looking at that, but also beyond, consider becoming a Global Ministries Earthkeeper. Our Earthkeepers training is coming up this fall. It's going to be in October, and we're taking applications now until August the 23rd. And we're going to be in 3 different locations that weekend on purpose, because one of the things we're doing at Global Ministries with many other agencies across the United Methodist Church is moving toward net zero emissions. And the way we're doing that in this case is to go to the people where you are and reduce the amount of distance that people have to come to us for a training. And so you can join with us. You can scan that URL code, if you like, a QR code on your phone, and go directly to our website and learn more about Earthkeepers and what the training is about and what our ministry offers to you. And some of the things that you will gain at that training this fall are the scripture and the theology that kind of backs up what this is about and how it connects the natural created world with the realities on the ground today. What kind of Wesleyan Methodist resources we have to offer, how to connect and network with folks all across the nation and the world, and be able to work together on some of these projects. And then recognize things like the anti-racism needs that we have in our churches, in our ministry, and especially in our mission. What are the eco-justice issues going on? And then what we want to help you do is craft a project plan that you can put into place either in your local church, in your neighborhood, in your community, in your annual conference, something that is on your heart and on your mind that you want to make happen, but you don't know how to bring that about. And the Earth Keepers training will do that and give you skills, not just for those local projects, but for some of this resiliency to prepare your community and your area, as Brian said, to be ready to pick up the pieces and put life back together more quickly afterward. And we as the church can really be instruments of preparing for that future, even before the difficulties and the struggles hit our communities. And so these are some of the ideas that we bring in the Earth Keepers training and program to you, and how it has really dovetailed with missions and this kind of ministry. And we look forward to you being a part of that, or be in touch with me with more questions. I'll put my email address in the chat box for you, and I would love to continue the conversation. Rashinda?
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, and just to underline that, Earth Keeper training there, looking for ways to do these things greener with less emissions. The 3 locations will involve a field trip. So there's some pretty cool places that trainees will get to go. And that's all, of course, been brokered ahead of time so that you get a chance to explore. So yeah, do check that out. I also was caught with when Jonathan, you mentioned, a trailer full of hammers and saws, and thinking of, when Reverend Dan was talking about, well, you get those hammers and saws on a boat, and, you hope it's a good season to float those out in Alaska to the islands where they need to be. And maybe when they get there, the community, you can't put that house back there. So these are, as I say, growing challenges for how we as people of faith, come to what is just resilience. What does that mean? And how do we learn together how that works? So I want to turn it over at this point to Cricket Denton. And really, she's coming to us from the New Jersey conference. Turn it over to you.
All right. I am going to be talking about racism in disaster response, and specifically how we are responding to our latest disaster in Greater New Jersey. There we go. All right, so I just wanted to start off with a basic fact, and that is that following a disaster, we know that Black and Hispanic residents and those with lower incomes are more likely to be affected by property damage or income loss than white and wealthier residents. And these racial disparities persist even after controlling for income. So that is just something that we know. But the bigger question is the why, right? We're living in 2023. This shouldn't be an issue anymore, but unfortunately it is. And it's something that we have to deal with as people of faith. So people of color are twice as likely to live in poverty. And because of this, they have limited access to resources to make past repairs. So they're living in houses, but maybe they don't have enough money to afford to fix their house if something goes wrong. So oftentimes their homes don't qualify for assistance after, a natural disaster. They don't have access to things like home repair loans or home buyer education. And oftentimes they'll be denied FEMA aid right off the bat. And unfortunately, as we know, many people are denied right off the bat, and they have to get advocates or some kind of assistance to put in those appeals to FEMA to get the aid that they actually qualify for. Another one of the issues we deal with is the legality of property. So we are finding that in communities of color, people inherit properties and houses, and they don't necessarily have the legal documentation to go along with that. So maybe there was never a will created, or maybe there were never lawyers involved to make sure that that property is transferred into their names, so that if it's damaged after a storm, they can't really prove that they have legal property. So it's just another obstacle for them to get assistance. And also home ownership versus rental. We find that a lot of people of color don't own their homes, they rent. And we know after a disaster, it doesn't matter if you own your home or if you rent, you're still going to incur damages. So we wanted to make sure that we address that in Greater New Jersey. So Hurricane Ida, this is the disaster that we're dealing with right now. In New Jersey, Hurricane Ida impacted over 80,000 households across 12 counties and caused the loss of 30 lives. So we had, previous to this, we had been dealing with Superstorm Sandy, and Hurricane Ida didn't have as much publicity, but it actually impacted more people. So who was affected the most? Residents of the most at-risk communities were increasingly pushed into permanent displacement, homelessness, or deeper into poverty. So vulnerable communities found it more challenging to recover and or too costly to try to rebuild. So we're here, years after the storm, and people still aren't back into their houses, or they're permanently displaced because of the storm. So in Greater New Jersey, one of the things we are focusing on as a conference is ending the sin of racism. So we define that as a sin against God because it devalues, dehumanizes, and oppresses someone that God created. Racism is a sin because it sets one group as God to judge other cultures and races. Eliminating racism is not easy because prejudice and biases are woven into the culture and systems in our society, but we are all called to end the sin of racism. So how we are addressing this specifically within our Ida recovery team, we were very intentional about the people that we hired to be on our recovery team. So 5 out of 6 people that serve on our Ida recovery team right now are people of color. 3 of our case managers are bilingual, and we make sure that all of our publications and forms are in both Spanish and English. So we're trying to reach vulnerable populations. So our response, we are trying to reach the most vulnerable. Although a lot of the damage is less visible than it was during Superstorm Sandy, the impact has been more severe, particularly on those marginalized communities that have already been impacted by the pandemic. So what homeowners and renters receive from federal assistance or insurance, we're finding that that fell far short of what their actual recovery costs are. So we're trying to fix that. We're trying to lessen the gap between those that have the ability to recover and those that do not have the ability to recover, specifically communities of color. So we are targeting specific counties. So the storm impacted 12 counties, but we specifically are targeting 3, Middlesex County, Somerset County, and Union counties, which house traditionally communities of color and the poorest communities in New Jersey, like Newark and New Brunswick. And like I said before, we're also assisting renters in addition to homeowners, which a lot of other nonprofit organizations are not doing. So that could come into just providing financial rental assistance, or we're doing a lot of appliance assistance, or if they have furniture that they lost during the storm, things of that nature. So what our conference uses as a model is called ACT. So we have to act now, and it's aspire and affiliate. That's where you get the A. Aspiring to be and do better, and affiliation, deeper and better relationships with people of other cultures and races, which is essential. Comprehend, learn and understand the history of racism. What is racism? How and why laws, systems, and values were developed to perpetuate racism, and how to live and work to end racism, and transforming individuals, congregations, communities, and systems to end prejudice, bias, oppression, and systems that perpetuate racism. Transformation is changing from the inside out. So I am just going to leave you today with the question of what is your conference doing, and how can you take that model and implement it into your communities, your disasters. We're all dealing with different things and with different communities, with different disasters. So what works for your conference? What works for your community? And how can you, in those communities, address racism when you are responding to disasters?
Thank you, Cricket. Yeah, that's absolutely something to look at, because that is, I think, part of our new reality on the ground, right? Things are different. We have just a couple minutes. Trish, I don't know if you're want to just, this is such a short little question or short answer because our time is so short, but you had mentioned what is and isn't helpful in Florida as we're looking at the big changes and big awareness changes, right? So as we become more aware of how complex climate change disruptions are, our response is kind of, we're looking for the simplicity within that complexity as well, to reach to congregations, like build us a solar trailer, right? As opposed to maybe filling 5,000 buckets. And but who knows, right? What is so Trish, are you able to speak to that just for like a minute? What are you seeing on the horizon as kind of new ways of talking about how to respond?
I think the biggest one is to make sure that we're asking that question. How can we help? And for us, it is the solar trailers. They are $10,000. And that is a great way that you can help our conference or other conferences respond, because we can get that power to that community and help provide some type of comfort, whether it's a small air conditioning unit or powering a food pantry so that the community can begin receiving food. Oftentimes organizations can't get in that immediate aftermath, but our trailer can, and we can start feeding people. Flood buckets are great, but those are 5-gallon buckets, 5-gallon plastic buckets, and there are thousands of them going into the communities. They're needed, but how can we do that differently? I don't know. Some conversations have already started about that. Clothes is not always a need. So just making sure that you're asking that question. How can we help? And ask the right people how to help.
Thank you, Trish. That's awesome. I also want to just acknowledge that Ken Sloan is here. Ken, I don't know if you want to wave, but Ken is with Discipleship Ministries, and he's stewardship and fundraising. So one of the big questions that gets asked in this work is, well, how do we fund it, right? Like there's this big gap between, as we're working on it, and we need trial and error money. We need money to try something that didn't work before hitting on the thing that works really well. So so Ken has waved here. Say hi, Ken, so you come up to the front in front of everybody.
Okay, hello, everybody.
Sorry about that, but he's in the chat, so chat with him and connect with him. I know he would love to hear from y'all. He looked back a couple of Movement Cafes ago, and you can hear his presentation. Really just wonderful to hear from him and have him be here. So thank you for being here, Ken. So Kathy has links and kind of next things right before we go into breakout groups. So we're getting ready for that. But first, Kathy has got some things to share. So Kathy, go ahead.
Right. There's been so much good information shared here, and I want to set you at ease on how you can find it again. So first of all, you can always go to the website, the Creation Justice Movement website, and I've put a link in the chat to that. That will take you to this page. And when you get here, you can see links that will get you to the Movement Cafe, which will include this one as it's recorded, and any past and future ones. If you're wondering about what's coming up next, the worship one isn't here yet for next month, but when the recording is available very soon, you will find it right here under July Movement Cafe, and you can see previous ones there. The other thing I will just mention is that also the newsletter is a source of an enormous amount of information. And again, from the homepage, click on monthly newsletter, you will get to all of our past newsletters. And our most recent one, the July one, was packed full of stories about disaster response, creative ideas, videos. This group, Grace Pictures, which includes staff from the West Ohio Conference, has been doing some amazing videos on the kind of work of the church in responding to disasters. So I really commend that, as well as these stories that were in the July newsletter. And then lastly, below those stories in the July newsletter is this list of resources. You heard Trish talk about the Footprint Project. There's a Connecting Neighbors training that several conferences are using. Interfaith Power and Light has kind of a resiliency hubs approach that's being used in some places. There's books and book studies, Creation Justice Ministries of the National Council of Churches, not to be confused with the United Methodist Creation Justice Movement, but they have a real whole series on faithful resilience. And then there's just some other lessons on heat and the Florida's green teams and so forth. So I just want to commend all of those resources to you, and you can find them all at umcreationjustice.org. And I will turn it back to you, Rashinda.
Okay, wonderful. So yeah, so there's room. There's room in the United Methodist Creation and Justice Movement. It's going to take all of us, and a number of conferences passed ambitious resolutions at annual conferences this year. A number of people, I think the 70% of American public cares about creation and climate care. And all the experts you're hearing from today, you're an expert too of what's happening in your very own backyard, what's happening where you are. And you can ask questions in your church too about like where does the church get its water? How are all these things going? And you'll find connect with collaborating organizations. It's totally okay if you're a Methodist to talk to the United Church of Christ and to talk to the NAACP and to talk to 350.org and hold your faith as you go forward in this, and you will be okay. Connect with others and celebrate the work, because it is and should be joyful work in the name of God. So, oh gosh, sorry to preach there for a minute there. Okay, so we are going to move next to the breakout rooms, and we have our presenters have graciously agreed to be in a breakout room, and that's partly because they want to hear from you. They have such tremendous knowledge. We want folks to be able to ask them questions and hear the good work they're doing. And I encourage you to participate in a breakout room. They're so rich and such a good conversation. And presenters here today are just marvelous. So, yeah. Welcome back, everybody. Welcome, welcome. I know it always feels really short to have, and we have, hello, little one there. Good to see so our little ones, this is the work we do for them, right? The littlest among us. So I know that those breakout rooms always feel very short. So yeah, I would say raise your hand who thought it was really short, but I've done that before. Yes. So I want to invite anybody want to share, please use the raised hand feature, something that kind of conversation or a moment in your breakout group. We have room to share one or two little snippets from that experience. Does anybody want to share something? Would anybody like to do that? Cricket, go ahead.
Yeah, just one thing that was said at the very end, which maybe sort of has to do with racism, but more politics. We were talking about, and I see this very prevalent in my community, but how to talk about creation care from a theological standpoint instead of it becoming politicized. And I gave a sermon one time, and I just said the word climate change, and I had two people get up and walk out. So how to do that without getting into political divisiveness. And then Ken shared some resources with us, and I think he's going to share it in the chat again, a link to how to have courageous conversations about climate change that might help steer that conversation. So I thought that was very, very valuable.
Awesome. Thank you, Cricket. I hear that. So if you have encountered that and you want to share about that, please put that in the chat because I'm sure that every one of us have stories about that, and to hear how other people are dealing with it can sometimes bolster us. So go ahead, Jane.
Yeah, I was just messaging Dan. This week's lectionary text includes Romans 8, where it says the whole of creation is groaning. I'm running with that. I'm going to include a lot of what you all said today. But I'm a guest pastor. I'm a visiting preacher, so I can say these things and not get in too much trouble.
Well, I say them and I do get in trouble actually, from not so much from the congregation, but from conference folks who struggling, right? So when you're, because here's a challenge, right? We are all so busy, and our conference folks are so stressed. They have so much on their plate that it can feel really difficult if somebody says, "Why aren't we talking about this other thing?" It's like, with what extra day in the week should I have an eighth day? God didn't make 8 days. And so the challenge can be to how do we fold this into our everyday work so it doesn't feel like this burden that we just can't get to, and we can find ways of refilling ourselves for the work. Okay, we have, I think, room for one more. One more. Dan, go ahead.
I think I'm clapping and raising my hand. I don't know how to do this. I would just mention, I appreciate that comment about concern about using the language that we do and people finding offense. One of the last things I was saying in our breakout group was the fact that in Alaska, I work within VOAD. I work with very, very conservative groups all the way up to Unitarians. And I mean, we have this great, and the beauty for me is the fact that all of us just go out to care for people. Let's build a home. Let's make certain they have water. It doesn't matter what our theology is. We're just going to work together. But what I do want to say is that many of us, I have yet to hear anybody in any of those groups deny the fact that climate is changing and it's affecting our communities. It's a little hard to argue that fact when you have people who are falling into the ocean. It literally, we literally have a school that the playground had to be shifted to the other side because the playground that they built when they built the school 15 years ago is gone. So, and now the school is having to get moved as well. So I just wanted to mention that it's hard to argue whether or not it's happening when you have villages slowly slipping away.
Amen, Dan. And amen. And thank you to everybody here who's doing this work. Kathy is going to offer prayer to pray us out. But before we do that, I want to give her an opportunity for any last things. Kathy, is there anything you want to share as we wrap up?
I think I already did my reminder of where you can find all this information, but please reach out if somehow you missed something, if there was some idea or a connection you started today in one of those conversations. Really, the building of this movement is based on relationship and connection, and our United Methodist connectional system is a perfect place to be doing more of that. And so please reach out if you need help making connections. We are here to do that. Are we ready for me to pray us out?
Yeah, and I just want to plug our worship series real quick. So there's a through the United Methodist Creation Justice System, Christina Sinks and Laura Baumgardner sort of headed up an effort to once again produce a Seasons of Creation worship series, and that is available on the United Methodist Creation Justice site with a number of authors from within your favorite Methodist churches. So don't forget to take a look at that as we move forward. And go ahead and Kathy, go ahead.
All right. Well, I welcome you to join me in prayer. Loving Creator God, our hearts are full with the harm we know is happening to your good creation, and in particular, all of the increasing unnatural disasters we've been hearing about today that are touching so many communities and so many lives. Our minds are full of the ideas and stories we have heard today, and we know the work in front of us is so important and daunting. Give us courage to take action. Give us clarity to know our next steps. Fill us with love. Fill us with hope. Thank you for giving us each other. Thank you for calling us to this holy vocation. Let us be faithful to that call, trusting that you are always with us. And send us forth from this cafe filled with your love and accompanied by the encouragement of your transformative spirit. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Okay, so we're going to roll out. It's always rude. There's this red button that says leave. And always feels a little rude to press it because we don't get to hang out in the pews or the church parking lot or the fellowship hall, but that is where we are now. So we're going to be rolling off. Be sure to connect if you want to connect. I am so grateful to all our presenters and so grateful to the team, Dawn and Kathy, to putting this together, and for all those involved in the movement. Jump in. Water's fine. We welcome and invite you.
Thanks.
Thanks. Bye.